Yeah. Okay.
So I'm here today with Professor Larry Rasmussen, who is the Reinhold Niebuhr Professor Emeritus of Social Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. Professor Rasmussen is one of the world's leading Christian environmentalists, or environmentalists from a religious perspective per se. And not only has he written many very influential, important works on these topics, he has played a very important role in training an entire generation, if not generations, of scholars who are now going forth and doing the important work that needs to be done. So it's a real honor and a pleasure to be able to be with you here, Professor Rasmussen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. I wanted to start with a question that I think about sometimes, and I was just thinking about this morning actually, the question of humility, which is not really a cool word to use or to think about in this day and age.
Yeah.
It's an age of let us go forth and continue to succeed and be confident, and introverts aren't necessarily very cool, and yet it's all about extroversion. But what is the role that humility plays as far as thinking about our relationship as human beings to one another, to people across the globe, to the world itself?
Yeah, thank you. I think about it a lot too these days because of the human imprint on the whole planet. I mean, the geologists are telling us that we may well be entering a new geological epoch. The first one brought about because of the cumulative effect of human activities. So the talk is about exiting the late Holocene, Greek for the wholly recent, W-H-O-L-L-Y, recent period, and entering the early Anthropocene. I don't know why geologists all speak Greek, but they do. Anthropocene from anthropos, meaning it's the dominance of human activities that have brought this about. And it's come about with a certain arrogance, which is traced to a series of world-changing events that issue from Europe initially, with conquest and colonization and commerce, Christianity, all packaged as a superior civilization. So and arrogant, a confidence that this was good for everyone, including the conquered peoples sometimes. So and it found the tools in modern science and technology to carry out this massive civilizational mission. And it was called that in French. This massive civilizational mission, supposedly good for all, but oblivious to both the impact on conquered peoples many times and the impact on the rest of the community of life. And to carry it out and to build the built environment to kind of replace the natural environment as the preferred habitat for at least those human beings that we're putting it together. So what's missing in this dramatic change by which human beings have become not just a force of nature. We've been that since the agricultural revolution of 11,000 years ago, when we settled societies from the hunter-gatherer period. So the whole time since the Neolithic revolution of 11,000 years ago has been a time when we've had an impact as a force of nature, but now a force of nature that's also a geological force. And it's the first time that that's happened. Now, why all of this to talk about humility? Well, not only do we need to have a more humble understanding of the fact that we do not control nature, even though that has been the aspiration for several centuries, and above all since the onset of the Industrial Revolution, 1750 or so. But take a look at the language. Human comes from humus. In Hebrew, it's Adam, Adam, from Adamah, topsoil. But that translates easily into English. The human from humus, human from topsoil. It's also the root of humility, which we might consider the fact that we're another expression of topsoil. We come from earth, we return to earth. And if you know about astrophysics these days, all of it is a late version of stardust. So we have cosmic connections, but the human is the earthling, is the creature of the ground. And that ought to keep us humble. At least we ought to have some humor about that, which is another word from the same root. So when you have human humility and humor, you get, even etymologically, even from our vocabulary, some sense of what should be our place in the grand scheme of things. I mean, even modern human beings are only, Homo sapiens are only a couple 100,000 years old. That's a blip. It's a blip. It's not just a blip in Earth time. It's a tiny blip in the universe's sense of time, you know. And stones have a far deeper memory than we do about these things. So I don't know of any virtue that would be more appropriate for the moment in which we live than humility as a species virtue. Now, I'm not talking about individual persons or peoples. If you're on the hurting side of conquest and colonization, then you want to speak up and struggle to assert your humanity and not exercise humility as ends up being some form of submission. So there's a lot of different dynamics going on here. But if you talk about our life as a species, as Homo sapiens, and where we are in the present moment with cumulative human activities affecting all of the ecosystems and the life of future generations of both human and other kind, then humility becomes a collective stance that ought to be promoted, and one plus for the world's religious traditions, all of them, and indigenous lifeways, is that it is a virtue. It is to be a quality of our stance toward one another and collectively toward the earth. Okay, enough on humility, probably.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful. So much there, of course. I wanted to pick one strand, which, and all of these, I could choose any one of these strands. Some people have commented that what we're going through, we, meaning the United States currently, politically, if I'm remembering correctly, is a reflection of our lack of humor, or the death of humor. Is that something you can relate to, or would you like to comment a little bit on that?
Only to say, and you know, that we always get in trouble when we take ourselves too seriously. One thing that comes through again and again for me, because of my teachers here at Union, Roger Shin, Reinhold, Niebuhr, is that they understood that we're the kind of beings that collectively are oppressive if we take ourselves too seriously.
Wow.
If we don't have the kind of reflection upon our own fragility and our own finitude that humor provides. If we can't laugh at ourselves, we're dangerous to others, and probably to ourselves too. So humor in that sense is tied again to humility.
Thank you. That's very powerful. You mentioned about the memory that rocks have. We tend to, of course, think for complex reasons, historic reasons, we tend to think of rocks as these inanimate objects that have no consciousness and things like that. And we need not get into that, or perhaps we could. What I wanted, in terms of my question at least, I wanted to ask you about the importance of memory itself. An argument perhaps could be put forward, which is that one of the major factors behind all of the awful things that we're witnessing today is, on the one hand, we have these incredible advancements through modern technology and modern thought and so forth, but at the same time, a cutting off of historic memory. And what is the importance of memory in terms of keeping us whole, keeping us humble, keeping us connected both to the past and also looking forward to the future?
Yeah. I think things are paradoxical here. On the one hand, you have people like Santayana saying, you know, the nation that does not remember its past is condemned to repeat it. I mean, memory is a correction. People will say, in light of terrible, terrible events like the Holocaust, never again. And so memory is kept alive in order not to repeat the worst that we're capable of doing to one another. On the other hand, sometimes memory functions in such a way as to actually be the source of oppression for one another. That is, because we can't forget what was done to us, we also tend to make that the source of a we-they dynamic, which can then inflict consequences that are oppressive to the other. So revenge issues out of memory, just as caution and correction and not repeating terrible things, issues out of memory. So I think there's a paradoxical element here. When I said that rocks have memory, that comes out of my own experience where I live in northern New Mexico, where one is keenly aware of geological ages because you're looking at them. And the Puebloan peoples, native peoples of northern New Mexico, do think that they wouldn't necessarily call it a consciousness about those massive and beautiful red and yellow cliffs of sandstone in Colorado, red rock, the ancient seabeds which are just facing there, including looking at the fossils. But they would talk about it as a memory because it's recording the past. And that's what memory does. It's a way of recording what has happened. And it becomes a part of their lives, and I think is a precious part. It becomes a part of their lives to be related to all that has happened in the past, and to be able to call that up from the memory that's recorded in the rock. So that is again a part of, are we earthlings? Are we groundlings? Are we creatures of ages past? Was there something that was in the making that led to us, that was here long before we ever appeared in any human form? And it's not unimportant in this age to have that kind of sense that we have a cosmic self and a geological self and a self related to what the rocks remember as well. So that's a dimension of memory beyond the memory that we just talked about in terms of immediate human memory.
As far as the idea of us versus them and the sort of separation, on the one hand, as human beings, there's a psychological process whereby we have to differentiate just through our growth. As children, as early borns, we don't have a sense of difference between ourselves and our mothers and our blankets, for instance, but we progressively gain that separation insight, and it's just part and parcel of living on one level. On another level, to my mind, the different religious traditions, all the great world traditions and the more also great, but the indigenous traditions, they ultimately, to use a Foucauldian notion, they're sort of technologies of the self which allow us to reconnect with the rest of the universe, as it were, ultimately, and of course beyond that, to reconnect with God. At the same time, this is something that I grapple with as a Christian, is I can't help but think of to put it quite frankly, the awful things that have been done historically in the name of Christianity to other peoples, first and foremost, and concurrently to what we call the natural world. And how, as far as I'm concerned as a Christian person, I don't see that as being representative of the tradition understood correctly, but this is my sort of contemporary, one may say liberal reading of Christianity, and I don't necessarily say that myself. But how do we understand this sort of vast arc of history that has come before us? relatively short in as far as wider human history is concerned. And how do we understand this, the history that Christianity has in relation to the wide, broader unfolding of history as it has gone before and is to come?
Yeah. Well, I think about it in Christian terms, but I think that what you're talking about is also deeply embedded in other religious traditions. And maybe the place to start is to say that we can't avoid the reality of we, they. I mean, all of us as human beings are tribal in that sense that we identify with different groups. Now the groups can change, and we can be part of multiple identities, embody them, but there's always this dimension of us and others. So that kind of othering process is inherent, and it's inherent because our timelines, our horizons are limited. We can't see everything at once. If you can cross the horizon, and what you'll come to is another horizon. Right. I mean, our views are limited. Our possibilities of identifying with others is limited. Right. So there isn't any way of avoiding this kind of identity, a kind of we identity, and that's always vis-a-vis other such identities. That's what I mean by we-they dynamic, is as old as recorded human history. But what Christianity and other traditions have, I think, insisted upon and striven for is that while there will always be others, they need not be enemies. And very often the we-they dynamic works out as a friend-enemy dynamic. And the world religions and indigenous lifeways have all struggled with this. How do we prevent the other from being enemy? And have always said, I think, that the other need not be enemy, even when it's the other. And so try to do that by simple commands. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and your neighbor as yourself, which is an affirmation of self-love, but says don't, no double standards. Put the other in the same framework as yourself. And I think what we regard as a kind of higher level of moral development is one in which we do get rid of double standards and we consider the other on the same terms, in the same framework as ourselves. Now, that's difficult. It doesn't happen very often. When I say our people that we regard as kind of morally our mentors and heroes are the people that did that. They came out of a we-they dynamic and remained in it, but at the same time put the other in the same framework, even though it wasn't we. So Gandhi is Hindu. But he says, you know, we want the British to leave, but we want them to leave as friends. or Martin Luther King, you know, fully immersed in the black church tradition, says we have to put white and black in the same framework morally. And so what he actually strove for was to try to get black populism and white populism to work together. That didn't happen, but the Poor People's Campaign was poor people's of all kinds. Our Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Germany in the seminary at Finkenwalde said, we can't hate those for whom we pray. And that needs to include the terrible people in our country who are carrying out terrible things. We pray for them as well. So the effort then is an effort to not deny the differentiation. That's actually a universal law. That's the law of the cosmos. To be is to be different. Nature has an outrageous propensity to try novelty. I mean, always adapting and changing and creating something new that's differentiated from the rest. So differentiation is a universal law. And then the question is, how do you maintain, how do you do that then without it exacting a price that is oppressive?
Thank you so much. We're going to come back in part 2 and explore some more of these questions.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.